In continuing our survey of the eukaryotic pathogens, we're going to talk about the lichens and the algae in slide set B from chapter 12. So when we talk about the lichens, these are a very unusual organism that is a combination of a fungi and a algae. You may have seen lichens out in the environment and didn't really recognize what they were. They're beautiful. They grow on rocks and on trees and various things, and they are quite colorful in their presentation. When we talk about lichens, these are a mutualistic combination of an algae, or it can be a cyanobacterium, and a fungus. The algae is going to produce the food, it secretes the carbohydrates, and the fungi is going to provide a holdfast so that these are going to be able to colonize very nutrient-poor environments. In the pictures here, you see some very interesting examples of the lichens that, again, I'm sure you've seen, but probably had no idea what they were. Lichens are found in habitats where neither the algae nor the fungi could survive alone. They are now mutualistically related, so they can't survive on their own. They have to be together. They are often the first life forms to colonize newly exposed soils or rocks. They are going to be found in areas where there's very little nutrients. On the tundra, you see the caribou following the lichens because the soil is so poor, there's no grasses that are growing, but these lichens are able to survive, and they often break down the rock into soil and nutrients that other plants and things may then be able to utilize. Here we see a picture of lichens growing on some cemetery stones, but this is one of the other unfortunate side effects of these lichens. They can actually chemically weather rock, but that rock doesn't have to be out in nature. It can be tombstones and monuments or buildings because they secrete organic acids that cause this weathering. Lichens are extremely slow growing because they are found in nutrient-poor environments, and they are very susceptible to air pollution and are often utilized as a way to measure air pollution in employed tests. Here we see what those lichens look like. You see an upper and lower cortex of the fungi, the lower one having these rhizines that helps it to attach, and then the medulla are the filaments that kind of make this nice basket weave for the algae to reside in. So as such, they've made this mutualistic relationship where both are benefiting, but they can no longer survive without their partner. So lichens are found out in nature in many colorful forms. Again, they're a combination of an algae and a fungi. The true algae, though, are going to be the photoautotrophs. They are going to be anything from unicellular to filamentous, or some that are quite large and multicellular. They don't all have to be green. We see examples here of both the red and the green algae, and they again have very interesting forms to them as well. When we talk about the algae, we often refer to them as the protist. So these are going to be a remnant of the unicellular forms, but again, not everything for the algae are unicellular. We have both clonial forms, filamentous forms, and so some of these can be multicellular. The characteristic of the algae, though, is going to be their various pigments that not only give them their color, but also help in photosynthesis. When we look at the algal habitats, when we think about algae that are in lakes and ponds on land, we know that they are the green algae. Green algae, the cyanobacteria, and we also talk about the euglenoids. That is because they are going to be able to use the red wavelengths of light. So in the littoral zone, in the upper portion of the water, we see that this is going to be where the red light is able to penetrate, and hence these are going to be our green algae. We're also going to see some of the unicellular forms, diatoms and dinoflagellates that we'll talk about. As we go farther down, where it starts to separate more into the orange and yellows, we see the kelp forest from our brown algae. At the deepest depths, where the blue wavelengths are able to penetrate, that's where we find the red algae being able to grow. Algae in the unicellular form can also have sexual and asexual reproduction, as we talked about with the fungi. Here we see a Chlamydomonas. Anytime you look at an example of water, you'll see these little green balls that are going to be bouncing around. They have flagella to be able to move, and especially using their eye spot to find the light. When things are good, they will go through mitosis and simply reproduce asexually. If you need a little genetic variation, then they will go through sexual reproduction, fertilization, zygote formation to give them the diploid zygote, and then go through meiosis to get back to the haploid. The Phaeophyta are the phyla for the brown algae. These can be the large kelp that sometimes look a little bit plant-like, but they are not plants. They have analogous features. So you see in the picture that they have a stipe, which looks something like a stem. They don't have leaves. Instead, they have these blades that are coming out of the pneumatocyst. But they're going to have cellulose and organic acid in their cell walls. They are multicellular, and they have chlorophyll A and C, but it's the xanthophylls that give them the nice brown color. They store carbohydrates, and many of these are harvested for algin. Algin is used in many foods and textiles, cosmetics, brewing, pharmaceuticals. Here's a list of some of the places where algin is found, and you may not have even realized. So things like marshmallows and your toothpaste and cleaners are all examples where this kind of thickening agent is useful. We also see another interesting property. The laminara is harvested for a chemical property that is used for vaginal dilation. So we see the algae have interesting properties that allow us to use them both for pharmaceutical purposes and food purposes as well. The Rhodophyta are the red algae. When you see these types of red algae, they kind of look a little bit more like a fan or feathery type of appearance to them. They have chlorophyll A and D, and the phycobiloproteins are going to be the notable feature for these that help to give them the red color. They are going to be harvested for things like agar and carrageenan. Agar we use as the solidifying agent for making agar plates to grow bacteria on up in the lab. Carrageenan, on the other hand, is found in a lot of various food products. So you see, again, on the right-hand side of the slide, some of the places where you might find this carrageenan being incorporated. These have been FDA approved, even though every once in a while you see people complaining about the carrageenan in our food sources, but these are natural products and so therefore aren't problematic. Although from the standpoint of not being a pathogen, some of the Rhodophyta can produce toxin. The majority of the red algae tend to be toxigenic, and so therefore these are not going to be ones that can be harvested to eat directly. And so sometimes I think that's why people think about the problem that could be in harvesting the carrageenan. But once you get it to the agar and the carrageenan, you have removed any toxic properties. Chlorophyta probably gave rise to our land plants, and that's why they look very much like the green plants that we see on land. You see in the right upper picture what is referred to as the sea lettuce, the ulva, and so this green algae actually looks like a head of lettuce that is growing in those not very deep but upper zones of the water. They do have cellulose in their cell walls, and they store glucose polymers as starch. But we see that similar to the green plants on land, they have chlorophyll A and B. When you start to have overabundance of phosphates and nitrogens and things in waters, we see these types of algal blooms. there have been problems with this type of seaweed washing up on shores, and to the point where the beaches are not even really usable for the amount of algae that's being washed up. Those are probably more familiar to you as algal forms, but the Basilorophyta are featured in what are referred to as diatoms. If you look under the microscope in water, you may see these types of crystalline structures. That is because these diatoms, the organism inside of this pectin and silica cell wall, kind of gives it this glistening kind of silica appearance or glassy appearance to them. They are unicellular, and as they are compacted over geological time, they become fossilized and are involved in making oil as a fossilized fuel. They do have chlorophylls and keratin and xanthophylls, but they also are toxic. They produce domoic acid, which is a potent neurotoxin. And if you actually look at these diatoms, they look almost like a hat box or a shoe box, where as they reproduce, you can see that one progeny is going to get the top half, the other progeny gets the bottom half during asexual reproduction. The dinoflagellates kind of look like a little space module. These are commonly what we refer to as plankton, so it's the base of the food chain in our oceans. They have a transverse flagella running around the middle, and then another flagellum that's kind of like a tail. They do as well store their glucose as starch. They have cellulose in their plasma membrane, and again, chlorophyll, but in the form of A and C, keratin, xanthines. But many of these as well can produce neurotoxins. The saxitoxins are especially problematic for what is referred to as paralytic shellfish poisoning. Even though these are toxic, many of them are symbionts with marine animals, and so we can find them in a variety of organelles within some marine organisms. The dinoflagellates oftentimes are involved with what are referred to as red tides. So you can visibly see these blooms of dinoflagellates sometimes as the water become overpopulated with these algae. If you see the red tides, obviously that kind of is a warning that those waters would not be safe, and the paralytic shellfish poisoning means that those filter feeders are taking up lots of those algae as they feed, and hence all of the toxic properties as well. So Otara is what occurs though, even if you're not directly eating the shellfish, you can also see this being passed up the food chain. And each time it gets passed up, it actually gets more concentrated in fatty tissues and things that then as larger fish are ingested, that we can get a problematic dose of these types of toxins. That's why you may see when you have these types of algal blooms, waters may be closed. There's also another interesting member of the dinoflagellates. As we're seeing more algal blooms over the past 50 years because of runoff of nutrients and phosphates into our waters, we have seen blooms from Pfiesteria. This has toxic effects that are definitely problematic for fish. You can see in the bottom panel to the left-hand side, the ulcerations on the fish because of this dinoflagellate. But we also feel that this may be causing problems for people as well. It hasn't been absolutely proven, but people suspect that there's what is referred to as possible estuary-associated syndrome. In areas where you have these types of algal blooms from the dinoflagellates, people often experience a variety of unusual symptoms. Things like memory loss and confusion, skin burning, respiratory irritation, gastrointestinal complaints. These may be caused by possibly some inhalation of the organism and their toxic properties, though that still has to be verified. But in general, as the dinoflagellates bloom, they are definitely a problem for the fish and other inhabitants of those waters. The Omycota are what are referred to as water molds. These are decomposers and plant parasites. Here you see a fish that has developed what people refer to as ick. The organisms have both sexual reproduction and asexual reproduction. The asexual spores are interesting because they actually are going to have the release of these motile zoospores that have flagella. When we have taken a look at these Omycota at the genetic level, we've now realized that they're more closely related to the diatoms and dinoflagellates than they are to other things such as fungi. That's why their name of the Omycota linking them back to fungi, but we now realize that's a misnaming, and they are more closely related to the algal members, the diatoms and dinoflagellates specifically. These are also plant parasites, and when we talk about the Phytophthora infestans, this was a major historical event. It was the causative agent of the Irish potato famine, which caused many Irish immigrants to leave Ireland and come to the United States because it literally was wiping out the main staple of food. We also see other species that infects eucalyptus, and the P. ramorum that is causing what is referred to as sudden oak death of many of our big, beautiful oak trees, especially out west. In the life cycle of the mycetes, you see again the asexual reproduction. The hyphae produce a sporangia, but then it has these motile zoospores that are released from the sporangium and swim away to then find a suitable substrate. For the sexual reproduction, that's kind of unusual as well. You see distinct male and female hyphae, where the female hyphae is going to make the ogonium, and then the male antheridial hyphae actually grow around to fertilize. The zygotes are then released, and these are then going to be put out into the environment again to find a favorable substrate to be able to germinate. So the algae, they differ from the bacteria, lots of interesting forms that you have probably seen, but anything from the unicellular to the very large multicellular kelp forests that we see with the Phaeophyta and everything in between.